Good evening and welcome to our Family and Life webinar, The Impact of the Children's Wellbeing and Schools Bill on Home Educators. It's good to have you with us. Now, the purpose of our online webinar for parents is twofold: to encourage parents who are concerned about the impact on home education of the Children's Wellbeing and Schools Bill. Firstly, to lobby parliamentarians, and secondly, and perhaps most importantly, to build long-term parental resistance to the legislation. Regrettably, as you no doubt know, it's already passed its third reading in the report stage by a very large majority. But we are not downhearted, we are determined, and we are a community of people who will be coming together this evening and in the future. During the course of this webinar, you can submit questions at any time. They won't be visible to everyone who's watching, but we can see them here. And we'll be focusing on those after our two speakers have spoken. And I really must introduce them straight away. We've got Dr. Rogers, who's going to be speaking first, followed by Randall Hardy. So I'll now introduce you, Dr. Rogers. Dr. Tom Rogers, he represents Parent Power, which is the UK's leading parental rights and advocacy organisation, of which he's one of the founding directors. He works as cultural outreach and project manager for the Society for the Protection of Unborn Children, and previously organised that organisation's campaign, SPUC's Safe at School campaign, which opposed compulsory relationships and sex education in schools. So without further ado, we leave you, Tom, Dr. Rogers, centre stage.
Thanks, John. So Parent Power was first formed in response to the campaign against compulsory relationships and sex education. And that came into force in England in 2017 as a result of an amendment to something called the Children and Social Work Act. That was under Theresa May's Conservative government. So that made a new subject, relationships education, compulsory in all primary schools with no parental right of withdrawal. And as we've seen, that subject has just been used to promote all kinds of, diverse relationships, family structures, and adult lifestyle choices, basically to promote and celebrate all things LGBT. And relationships and sex education was another subject, and this was made compulsory in all secondary schools. And that gave parents a very qualified right to request withdrawal from the sex education components of the subject until the child is 15, subject to the head teacher's approval, with children being able to opt into sex education against their parents' wishes thereafter. So we saw this as a very significant attack on our rights as parents to raise our children according to our best parental judgment. Parents had, up to then, always had the right to withdraw from sex education. But once rebranded as relationships education, parents lost this right to opt out. And with no real official definition of the difference between sex education and relationships education, parents face a further loss of control over areas which had long been regarded as down to parental discretion. An associated subject, health education, was also made compulsory in all state-funded schools. And this attempts to cover pretty much every aspect of the child's mental and physical health and well-being. So the whole thing now, the whole subject is now known as RSHE, Relationship, Sex and Health Education. So altogether, the role of the school, the teacher, and the state was greatly expanded at the expense of parents when that legislation came into force in 2019. And this new subject, incorporating health education, took over much of the natural territory of parents. And there's a kind of implicit assumption with these subjects that parents are incapable of either properly looking after their children or teaching them how to look after themselves. And we've had parents approach us with all kinds of concerns. For instance, their children being forced to take part in pride parades, 5-year-olds being taught to label their private parts. I had the mother of an 8-year-old girl call me who was traumatized after being shown a video in her class explaining what gay men do in bed. We've had cases of 9-year-olds being taught about pansexuality and all kinds of different genders. And the list just goes on. So although we're mainly focused tonight on the rights of parents to home educate, there's important links that I want to briefly touch on in relation to our experience of fighting RSHE. So firstly, concern over what children are being taught in school and loss of parental control over that has undoubtedly been a major driver in the rapid growth in home education in the past 5 years. In 2020, the first year following the introduction of compulsory RSHE, over 19,500 children were removed from school registers by their parents to home educate. Now, there was, of course, the impact of the COVID school lockdowns, but that was also the first time that many parents were forced to experience home education for themselves. Many liked it and they stuck with it. In 2021, there are an estimated 81,000 children in the country being home educated. And by December 2024, this figure was 112,000. So that's an increase of 38% in just 3 years. And that figure is mainly based on FOI requests from councils who have some records. So it could be a lot more. There isn't, of course, an official register as yet. And that's one of the things that the Children and Wellbeing Bill seeks to do. So second, no surprise, therefore, given that what I've just said, that the push to impose compulsory sex education has long gone hand in hand with attempts by the state also to impose tighter restrictions and controls on home education. In 2009, we had to fight the Labour government's Children, Schools and Families Bill, which was sponsored by the then Secretary of State for Education, Ed Balls. And this sought to introduce both compulsory sex education and mandatory registration of home educators with annual inspections at the home. And this was based on the recommendations of something the government commissioned called the Badman Report. But it was testament to the impassioned lobbying from home educators and concerned parents across the UK that both of these dangerous provisions were dropped when the Act was eventually passed just before the May 2010 election. And there are a number of further attempts to bring in mandatory registration for home educators, mainly via private members' bills, which were tacitly supported by the government, as well as the last government's own 2022 schools bill, which failed for various other reasons. So it's clear that there's long been powerful forces in the political establishment that also want to strongly control any alternative provision parents want to give their children, if they don't agree with what or how their children are taught in the school system. Thirdly, like compulsory RSHE, the move to mandatory home education registers is being done on the justification that these measures are necessary to safeguard and protect children. It was argued that relationships education was needed so all children knew how to protect themselves from sexual abuse and digital online threats. For instance, classes of 5-year-olds being made to name and label their intimate body parts was on the premise that they can then report abuse. and that children needed to be taught to celebrate everything LGBT to protect children who chose to be different from bullying. And the mantra at the time was all children should be equipped to have happy and healthy relationships and to be ready for life in modern Britain. And registration of home educators is being brought in with the same justification of it being mainly a safeguarding measure. That if those children are not in school and they are therefore hidden children who do not have teachers and school staff to look after them, and they could be being abused at home. And it's no accident that the bill was introduced into Parliament in November 2024, around the time of the Sarah Sharif murder trial and verdicts, that appalling case of abuse and murder of a 10-year-old girl by a violent father and stepmother. And much has been made of the fact that her father at one point removed her from school on the grounds that he would home educate her. And this parental freedom is somehow now to blame for what happened to Sarah. But in fact, her whole life consists of a whole catalogue of failings and serious errors by the care system. Sarah was put under a child protection plan as soon as she was born due to the abuse of her siblings and concerns that she was at risk of harm from both of her parents, who separated in 2015 and later divorced. Sarah, after that, lived with her mother, but in 2019, the family courts actually awarded custody of Sarah and her siblings to her father, Ufa, despite him being known for his serious domestic violence. 2022, Sarah's school noticed bruising and reported it to the authorities. In March 2023, they noticed bruising again, and this prompted a social services investigation. The case was closed after just 6 days, and Sarah never returned to school. She was found dead on 10th of August 2023, midway through the summer holidays. So what is clear is that another database would not have saved Sarah Sharif. Moreover, as she died halfway through the summer vacation, when she would not have been at school for 6 weeks anyway, we can hardly blame this appalling crime on home education. Maybe, for instance, it's more to do with the institutional and moral deficiencies of an educational and social care system that also so tragically failed so many other victims of abuse, including the thousands of young girls who are victims of the grooming gangs, as well as the devastating effects of family breakdown and the collapse of our Judeo-Christian values, which underpinned our nation's social and cultural fabric for so long. And finally, the experience of challenging mandatory RSHE has also been instructive concerning what we can expect in confronting the new legislation on home education in the event of it passing, which it seems very likely to. So we've learned, for example, how badly written laws and regulations that are vague or open-ended can be used by schools and the authorities to sideline or reject parental concerns. But we've also experienced how we can use many of the same flaws of the legislation to our advantage. Over the past 6 years, we've supported many parents who've had to challenge teaching they deem completely unsuitable for their children, including their right to withdraw their children from those lessons. We've supported many brave parents who have had to challenge their schools, local authorities, dioceses, and even taken their fight to the Department for Education. Sometimes these parents have felt like they're banging their heads against a brick wall, but we've also seen some remarkable breakthrough results, with parents achieving all kinds of concessions and small and significant victories, such as the right to keep their children withdrawn from all RSHE lessons. Sometimes these successful challenges have also positively impacted the culture of the whole school. And collectively, these challenges were also starting to have a tangible impact on the bigger picture, turning the tables politically, to the point where significant parental rights were being secured under the Sunak government, such as the right to review RSHE materials and a very significant backlash against transgender ideology. So I know it looks like we've had a real setback in many of these areas in the wake of Labour's so-called Loveless landslide, but the evidence suggests that that's not necessarily indicative of the cultural direction of our country. So I wanted to end on this positive note that persistent and courageous challenge can and does pay off. And whatever happens in the wake of this bill, it's not the end of the story. It's just the beginning. And we all know that our children are worth fighting for.
Thank you very much indeed, Dr. Rogers. That was a great start to our webinar. And it's now my great pleasure. I can see that questions have already begun to come in, which is good. Do remember that you can post questions during the course of the presentation, and we'll deal with those at the end. The questions only visible to ourselves here on stage, as it were. So now it is my great pleasure to introduce our next speaker, and it's Randall Hardy. He's a long time defender of the freedom to home educate, and his personal website is No Nationalisation of Our Kids. Just have to put that into the top bar on your web on your browsers, and it will just come up automatically. He also publishes the blog HE Byte. Having witnessed the benefits of home education within his own family, Mr. Hardy has maintained an ongoing interest in the political climate affecting English home educators since 2010. He's particularly exercised about the increasing pressures which home educators now found themselves under in many parts of the world, and he seeks to encourage parents everywhere to value their parenthood, protect their freedoms, and take up their responsibility to provide their children with a suitable education. So, Mr. Hardy, over to you.
Thank you, John. I'm good to share my screen, everybody. Sorry, no, I did the wrong thing. I'll be there in a second. Hide. That's what I need to do. Right. Well, thank you for having me, John, and thank you to everybody for coming along. I'm more used to Zoom where I can see some of you. Tonight I'm talking to myself, which will be a bit awkward. I'm sharing my screen, and can I say now that in the files area, don't go there yet, in the files area there are copies of these slides and also links to any references I make in them. So in that sense, you don't need to worry about what I'm saying. You'll be able to download them during question time and there. So the question before us is, what is the impact of the Children's Wellbeing Schools Bill and Schools Bill on home educators? Well, there's a family for you. It's a nice intergenerational family, no racial things. I had to be very careful. I'm sure you'll appreciate that. Here's a summary of what I think the impact will be. Oh, by the way, you'll see that I've renamed it to the Children's Woe and Surveillance Bill. The surveillance wasn't mine. Somebody else came up with that. And I wanted to find something to keep the initials the same. And woe seems to be the thing, because this will not benefit children. It will in the minds of politicians, but it won't in reality, because it's built on the wrong foundations. Let me move on. Oh, by the way, I've shrunk our family to the bottom corner there, so they're with us all the way through this. John's mentioned the HE Byte. I'm just mentioning it to say there's a page on there that the team has done with all the links to the bill. There are other pages, places you can go for them. They're in the PDF, one of the PDFs down, as are all the links. Okay, now this isn't about home education, but have you come across this quote before? Children must be free to think in all directions, irrespective of the peculiar ideas of parents who often seal their children's minds with preconceived prejudices and false concepts of past generations. Unless we are very careful indeed, and very conscientious, there is still great danger that our children may turn out to be the same kind of people we are. If you've not heard it before, it's by this gentleman, Brock Chisholm, who was the first Director General of the World Health Organization, which achieved far more fame about 5 years ago than it ever had before. The reference is there. It's also on the PDF. This shows the deep roots of what's happening to the family. There are other people I could quote, but time will not allow me. This is just a very neat one. This world influential person wanted to say we need to separate children from the thinking of their parents. And we see that working out in many ways. Tom's listed some already. I'm going on to another one. Yes, it's in the schools bill. I know it's not to do with home educators, but free breakfast clubs. What relevance have they got to this question? Well, you may not know it, but the government is putting out new documents to do with this bill really often. This one was published last Monday. It's the 12th impact assessment to go with the bill. I can't read them all. You can't read them all. But I did spot this in it because one of the provisions is for free breakfast clubs. And I'll read the first line. I don't read all these slides to you, but it says, for our children who start their day with unhealthy food, such as sugary or processed meals, the risk of obesity, etc. And then they go on to say that breakfast clubs, according to research, encourage healthier eating and things. And this aligns with Article 24 of the United Nations Charter on the Rights of the Child, because it increases access to nutritious food. Did you know that? Breakfast clubs are not the idea of Bridget Phillipson, Keir Starmer, or even our Children's Commissioner, Dame Rachel D'Souza. They are actually the idea of the people who interpret the UNCRC today. Now, we'll come on to that because here's another report from last September. This is the Children's Commissioner for Wales, and she did a report on obesity and healthy weight. And in it, she talks about this same article, Article 24 of the United Nations. Now, if you go onto her website, you'll see a very short summary of it. If you look up the proper article, it's a bit longer. But she quotes that this is why every child has a right to the highest possible standard and need nutritious foods. I smile about that, but I'll keep that one for a couple of minutes. Okay, but then she goes on to say this. She quotes a document which is the general comments, and this is the small print that hides behind every article of most treaties. There are general comments, and these are like guides on how states should interpret these articles. So it's no good just reading the article. You have to read the general comments. And she's done that, thankfully, and she found this wonderful quote. She said, adequate nutrition and growth monitoring in early childhood are particularly important and the gap is hers, it's not mine. School feeding is desirable to ensure all pupils have a full meal every day. I think that's a terrible phrase. School feeding is desirable. Makes me feel like they're treating children like battery hens. It's a terrible mindset. But this is what it is. It is a desire to say parents can't feed their children properly. So the state has to do it. Did you realize this? Did you realize that this is an anti-family policy? It says the state can't do it. But I want to say to you, meal times are vital opportunities for our relationships to be nurtured. However, international authorities want children to bond with state employees more than with their own parents. We live in an economic age. Parents are told, therefore, to leave parenting to the state while they go out and work, not for the good of the family, but to increase gross domestic product. I want to tell you and argue that home educators are the very antithesis of this doctrine. We are the last family standing in resistance to this materialistic philosophy. I also want to say we should be the alarm bell to every other family, because most have been drawn into surrendering their parenthood to the state. Oh, by the way, here's the reality. Published last Sunday. Free school meals in Wales should be healthier. I must admit, looking at that plateful, I don't think it turns my appetite on. What are these kids being put through because school feeding is a good idea? And it's not just there. We all know that Bridget Phillipson's telling people that having their children breakfast at school will save them £450 a year. The president of the Association of School and College Leaders said this a week ago today. He said that basically the daily funding rate of 60p is absurd. And he says you can't do it on the money. And I love his punchline. It's less than half the price of a Greggs sausage roll. So next time somebody says, aren't these school breakfast clubs a good idea? Say, would you like your kids to go to school on half a sausage roll? I don't think I would. Actually, I don't want them to go to school, but that's another matter. I want to argue and say quite strongly that the evidence is that the state does not do well-being. Those meals are not for the well-being of children. They might be in their heads, but not in reality. The state does not do well-being, it does economics. I'll let you think about that. Families do well-being. We move on. When we're looking at the bill, it's not in this bill, it's in the 1996 Education Act. It came out of the 1944 Butler Education Act. It survives here as Section 7, and it's really important. It defines what a suitable education is, but before that, it says it is the duty of parents to secure education of children of compulsory school age. Now, this is important. We'll mention Germany later. In Germany, it is not the duty of parents to secure education for children, it's the duty of the state. This was put into the Act in 1944 to prevent what had happened in Germany, or what had been happening in Germany, happening in this country. And people wanted to take it out. But this duty is on parents to prevent totalitarianism. And then it says that education should cause the child to receive an efficient full-time education suitable to the child, or namely his age, ability, aptitude, and any special needs, educational needs that child has. The education which is suitable is to the child, not to the state, not really to the parents, but it has to be suitable to the child. So I want to lay that foundation tonight. I want to lay a foundation in your mind that it is parental duty that we're talking about. It is the duty of parents to secure this education, not the duty of the state. But the state doesn't like that. Let's move on. Now, this is the front cover of the bill as it stands today. It was reprinted following the report stage and the third reading in the Commons on Monday and Tuesday. Once they got through those, they reprinted it. They had a load of new clauses to it. And the clauses I want to talk about tonight are Clause 4, the information sharing and consistent identifiers. Clause 30 to 35, which is children not in school, which directly impacts all home educators. And 36 to 43 will get a passing mention. This is independent educational institutions, which many, but not all, home educators use to supplement the education they're arranging, they're providing for their children. But we don't need just to look at the bill. There's a whole raft of documents. And honestly, just before I came on tonight, I discovered that in the last 2 days, there's been 3 more published that I haven't even looked at yet. And now this is from the original policy summary notes. And it's about these consistent identifiers. And they say the measures are there to improve data sharing between agencies, to better safeguard, support children and families by sharing data everywhere. I tell you, I'm rather cynical about that. I don't think it's about safeguarding and supporting children. I want to say it's about tracking and tracing children. This is what it's about. It's about the state knowing what parents are doing to every child and what's happening to them, because they don't trust parents. And it's not really the children they're surveilling, it's the parents. And this is an idea that is terrifying. What they want, if you've not heard about it, but you should be talking to this about every family, to every family you know. They want to give your child a number which will help them be tracked and traced through every government department, every local authority, and so on. This number will identify them. They did something similar under Tony Blair, but the trouble was children's names are not good enough. John Smith might be Johnny Smith, might be Jay Smith, could even be Joanna Smith or something like that. Names do not get recorded. If they got a middle initial, that can mess it up as well. And contact point failed. One of the reasons it failed because it couldn't identify children. Bridget Phillipson, our Secretary of State for Education, has said she wants this, and she wants it to be put on steroids, known as artificial intelligence. We're coming on to the registers in a minute, but they are not going to be fill them in on paper and send them to the local authority to process. We had a statement in a recent document saying that they would be for parents to fill in online, and then of course they'll be fed into the great data bank managed by AI. So this is information sharing and consistent identifiers. It is very similar to what was planned under the Scottish named person scheme, which ran onto the rocks in 2016 because the Christian Institute supported home educators in Scotland who'd originally flagged up the dangers, and they supported them and they won the case in the High Court. So this, to me, is a foundational problem that isn't just for home educators. Somebody else sees it as a problem. This is a piece of research that I think is about 2 years old now. It could be less. It could be less than that. From a project that was a joint project between Southampton University and Westminster, and it's a short video. Is the key point, which you can see on the screenshot. If we'd had time tonight, I'd have run it all for you, but we haven't. So please, if you don't do anything else after this, go and watch this, because Val Gillies from Westminster University says, if you're a parent, a group working with parents, or simply someone with an interest in how our data is being used, watch our animation. If you want to know more about what we found, and if you'd like to know more about what we found, go to our other resources. It's a really vital information because it tells you that red flags can get put against a child or a family, but it's much harder to get them taken down. Her colleague, who was the lead in this, says, we believe that policy developments and data linkage and analytics practices to inform services interventions are moving ahead of public knowledge and consent, and we should all take time to understand this better and consider what it means. Please set yourself some homework. The link will be in the document you can download. Please look at it. Please talk to the families about it. This is dangerous. Let's move on to the bill again. These are the clauses to do with home educators. If we were to go through them all tonight, well, it wouldn't be tonight. It would have to be a week-long seminar. And we've not signed up for that. I haven't got the time. I haven't done the research. So we're just going to look at this one in a little bit more depth. Number 31 now, as it stands, clause 31, talks about registration. Registration. This sets up the registers, and it's the duty to register children not in school. And it tells them that a local authority must maintain a register for children who are eligible and who live in that authority's area. Number 2 tells you that a child is eligible if 3 conditions are met. I'm not going to, you can read it in the bill yourself, but this is the foundation on which these registers are being set up. Later on, it goes on to what's got to go into these registers. This is a new clause into the Education Act 436C, content and maintenance of registers. Now, if you only read number 1, you think it was very reasonable. A child's name, date of birth, and home address. Well, 1A, and that sounds reasonable. B, the name and address of each parent of the child. Wouldn't that be the same? No, because there's a lot of broken families. And amongst those broken families, there are parents who are not getting on very well. And some parents live in fear of their ex-partner knowing where they live. And they do their best not to let the local authority make their new address available to the other parent. And yet this database, which will be badly shared, which somebody will say, I'm trying to contact my wife and I've lost touch with her or something like that. Oh, I'll just look it up for you. And here it is. And there's a lot of worried home educators about B. Now, the name of each parent who's providing education to that child. Excuse me, that's a daft question. If the parents are living with the child, or even if the child shares times with them, I would say both parents are always providing education, because education comes through life, not through sat in a classroom. D, this is ridiculous. The amount of time that the child spends receiving education from each parent. Oh, by the way, if any of these change, you have 15 days to update the database, or else you could be in trouble with the local authority. I'm saying to home educators, just if you do decide to respond to this, just say every waking hour. I can't see any other logical answer to that question. But it doesn't stop there. That's only point one. That's point 1A to D. E then asks for a lot more information on any other person than the parent. They want to know the name and address of individuals or organizations, a description of each type of provider, the postal address, or if you haven't got that, the website or email address. Now, a bit hard with YouTube influencers, but we won't go there. And the amount of time the child spends receiving that education, and the amount of time the child spends without the parent present. Now, again, if you're online, you might be walking in and out of the room. How do you know that? What if grandma or granddad reads a book to the children or takes them out to the zoo or the museum? That's part of their education. This makes it clear that the department doesn't understand home education, doesn't understand education actually, but this is what's happening. And this type of information has to be put on and kept updated on the thing. So if you take them to a club, even if you stop there, and one of the leaders changes, you are meant to say, please can I have your name and address to the new one? I've got 15 days to put it on this database. This is not reasonable. This is why I'm calling it a surveillance bill. That is what it is. And then to all this, the local authority has got to put on the same database a list of things. Child's protected characteristics. I thought they were meant to be protected. A case of a child, whether they've got any special educational needs or additional learning needs if they're in Wales, whether they've been a child in need, assessed for having needs for care and support, whether the child's ever been looked after by the local authority, the reason they meet condition C, whether arrangement under 436A, and they're not receiving an education. Loads and loads of data is going on to this. Oh, and here's some more. Whether they've been in school ever, whether sport's been provided, any action being taken in regard to school attendance orders. All this has got to be put on the database. That's quite a lot, isn't it? No, it's not. Because right at the end, it says, and any other information about the child and anything to do with them that the Secretary of State or the Welsh ministers consider, as the case may be, should be included in the register for the purpose of promoting safe or safeguarding the education or welfare of the children. Oh, by the way, if you haven't picked this up, this bill was originally introduced just for England, but on Monday it was announced by the Welsh government they asked the Westminster government to include them in it. So this is now a bill that applies whether you live in England or Wales. And one minister said in answer to a debate that they're also talking with Scotland about what they want to take on from this bill. So this is a massive data grab. There's an awful lot on the list, and there's even more there. But it doesn't stop there. I'll have a drink while you read that. A register under this section may also contain any other information that the local authority considers appropriate. We must move on. They also want anybody that provides education then to answer other questions. And I'm not going to hang around with that too much, but that is there. Do have a look at it, download the slides and have a look at that, what they're coming, download the bill. I want to finish by talking about this yet another document. It's the Children's Wellbeing and School Bill European Convention of Human Rights Memorandum. That's the index. You work down the index, and there's the two sections we're concerned about. The clause numbers are the original ones. They're not the current ones, but it is basically the same clauses. Now, as you work through it, in paragraph 149 on page 36, you will find a reference underlined in red to a court case known as Conrad v. Germany 2006. And the Department for Education are using this to argue that states can interfere with other human rights for the benefit of the children. But this is based on German law. But I want to point out a couple of things else from this. I've circled one word in purple, socialized. It's to help identify children who may be neglected or socialized. Now, home educators think that means they have friends to play with, not to politicians and educationalists. Socialized means conditioned how to think and how to behave as an adult. So socialized here is in ways that are harmful to them or that will make them harmful to others. That's a very vague definition. Who defines what is harmful? Because I'm sure from what Tom said earlier, some of you here think what the government is doing today is harmful to children, but the government doesn't. So we're here into the world of subjective decisions. And the other thing, the underlined in blue at the bottom, the default position is this: school is considered a protective environment for most children. You look at the facts that are coming out, that is not so, but that is what the government believes. I could say more, time is going. But I want to get onto this as I finish. There is no, they say in paragraph 161, there is no consensus amongst contracting states in relation to compulsory education at school, but then they claim that it's within the state's margin of appreciation, and they quote Conrad v. Germany again. And they say in this case, they came out and they found four things, and I do want to read this to you. It is important. It says, A, the state has a role in ensuring children are educated and ensuring pluralism in education, which is key in a democratic society. On its own, we could possibly accept that. But we get into B. Now, you all think human rights say that parents have primacy in the education of their children. They do not, according to the Department for Education. The child's right to an education takes priority over respect for parental, religious, and and philosophical convictions if the two are incompatible. Who decides they're incompatible? Based on this, they say the state can insist on compulsory education in school and that the aims of ensuring acquisition of knowledge and of integrating minorities into society are legitimate justification for insisting on this and within a country's own margin of appreciation. Really? This is saying that if the state thinks you can't teach your children what the state wants them to learn about morals and other things, they can force your children into school. And I am fairly convinced in the sites of this argument in particular are the strictly Orthodox Jewish communities which have their own education system, and they're trying to kill it. But what is true for them is true for everybody else who has a religious or philosophical conviction different to the state. And they say we can get around it because the ability of parents to educate their children after school and at weekends in conformity with their religious convictions is sufficient to establish that their human rights as parents were not restricted in a disappropriate manner. In summary, I want to say that I think we ought to rename the Department for Education as the Department for Enforced Schooling. And in fact, I recently had an article published in the Daily Skeptic, which I gave it that title when I submitted it. The editor didn't like it. He preferred this one. Oh, I'm feeling like I'm Mr. Blobby because he keeps bringing it up. Anyway, that the link for that is in the thing. And if you want my website, that's also in the thing. And there's there. John, welcome back on stage. Almost bang on time, but just a little bit more. Thank you. I'll stop screen sharing now.
Well, thank you so much, Mr. Hardy, and thank you, Dr. Rogers. I'm sure I'm speaking on behalf of everybody who's been listening, that it's not just the wealth of content in what you both shared with us, but just the way you're speaking, it teaches us how to be in continuing this whole battle. We do have some questions. Surprise, surprise. Given the evident enthusiasm for this webinar reflected in our numbers participating, it's very encouraging, very encouraging. And I just read this first question. Many home educators are too fearful to write to their member of parliament because this would out themselves as home educators. Hence, they find themselves in the frustrating situation of not being able to fight the bill. Would you agree, therefore, that we need to raise an army of people who are not vulnerable, that is, not home educators themselves, to fight this battle with us? How do we raise such an army? Well, my children are well beyond the education in schools and university now. So you've got one recruit, and I'm sure many other grandparents who are not necessarily involved, or their children not necessarily involved in home education.
Yeah. I would say you have nothing to fear and nothing to lose. And I think it's quite essential, actually, that parliamentarians get to meet real parents who are home educating, so they can understand what you do at home, how you educate your children. And because at the moment, they're just adopting the mentality of the image of home educators that they're getting from the media, which is all based on innuendo, and you know, they're not being taught properly. Of course, there's some really good home educators, but you know, they just don't know. So if they can actually meet real parents, then I think that would actually start to be a game changer. And when we've heard, you know, we've been watching the parliamentary debates, and when particular members of parliament have brought up cases of their constituents and quoted letters from their constituents or from meetings from their constituents, yeah, that's just really helped to put a human face on. And also, I'd just say now, you haven't got anything to lose, quite frankly. We haven't got anything to lose at this point, but everything to gain, because the legislation is so bad.
Thanks, Tom. Randall, what about you? You're on silent, Randall. You're on mute.
Yeah, I did it. Tom, we're getting a bit of echo from you when you're not talking. Could you mute?
Yeah.
Two things really. One, to back up Tom, count how much you've got to lose by keeping quiet. You've got too much to lose by keeping quiet. but to encourage people, on the HE Bike website, there's an article about the fact that, a bit like doctors, MPs have a confidentiality responsibility when contacted by their constituents. So if you're worried about it, spell it out, remind them. When you write to them, you just say, please keep this confidential, do not share with anybody other than by gaining my permission first. And that covers that. They would be breaking their own code of conduct if they mentioned your name to there. Secondly, it is this matter that Tom was talking about. I talk about this with local councillors as well. You see, local councillors have a very big voice in their party. Even if their MP isn't from their party, they still get voice into the party machine. And if they know nothing about home education, they only go on what the media's doing. So the more home educators can connect with politicians, councillors or MPs or lords, which is the next stage we're going on with the thing, and get them to see the sterling work that such a high percentage of home educators are doing, the more it changes the political narrative. And that's it. Now, on the second part of the question, an army of volunteers, yes. But to do that, we've got to make it bigger than the home education question. And we've got to do that because it is bigger. Why do you think I talked about school meals? About the consistent identifier. These are not just home educating issues. This is a parenting thing. And in the named person scheme in Scotland, it was the home educators that woke up to the dangers first. But they got some very diverse people on board. And while we're still on this, there's one video. It's on the Christian Institute website. If there's any follow-up things, I knew I've come up with some things, but there's one video done about 18 months ago on the 5th anniversary by an independent social worker called Maggie Mellon. If you go on the social work on the Christian Institute website, you'll probably find it. And her headline is, "The state makes a lousy parent." And actually, no matter how bad parents are, the state is generally worse. There's even now a phrase that Birmingham City Council a couple of years ago decided was a protected characteristic. The phrase, "a care experienced person." And this is because so many young people who've been through the care system come out traumatized by it. And there's now a worldwide movement of care experienced persons. So we've got to expand that army, but we've also got to say the state tells us it will provide all these good things for our children, but actually look at its track record. Look at its track record. It isn't doing that. My wife, a couple of weeks ago, we were at a protest about the bill in Birmingham. She ended up talking to a couple of ladies. One of them was a school teacher, and she honestly believed that no child ever came to harm in the school. That narrative has got to change. And it's up to home educators to be the alarm for everybody else, for other families. Talk to them. It is not a movement that will get those parents on board who aren't home educators. It is their friends, their neighbours, their family, talking to them about these things. Zip.
It's just worth pointing out as well that this particular bill brings even greater control on schools as well. So a lot of the opposition from the other main parties has been to do with the way it's rolling back a lot of the decentralization that was achieved in education with, you know, the role of the academies and all the different types of schools. So from now on, every state-funded school of this bill, when this bill goes through, will have to follow the national curriculum, which academies didn't have to do before. And they're just undergoing a major review of the national curriculum, and all the headlines, particularly in the conservative press, have been about how that's going to be further wokeified. So, you know, parents who are sending their children to school also need to be concerned about the tighter controls of the government and what their children are learning, and the further loss of control of the parent and the individual schools, you know, including faith schools.
Thank you. I've got quite a few questions, so we'll have to zip through some of the answers, I think, which are. I don't want you to stop you going into depth, though. We have got quite a few questions. Thanks for this webinar. One of our participants says, what powers will the government and local councils gain under the new legislation, and what might the impact be on homeschooling parents? Could that include being forced, I presume the parents being forced to attend compulsory RSH education classes? So I don't know. It was you, Tom, that this.
I can start off with that, and then if Randall wants to add anything. But one of the really concerning things about this bill is that local authorities are given quite alarming new powers. So Randall outlined the type of information that's going to be required for parents to input onto this register. A whole range of things, protected characteristics, who they're being taught by, and when, and how much time each parent spends teaching them. But also there's a sort of catch-all clause at the end of that, which is something to the effect of, and whatever other information the local authority deems appropriate. So it really, I suppose, depends on how kind of activist the local authority is. I mean, they could potentially ask for any information that they want, exactly what you're teaching the child, exactly what they're learning, the curriculum you teach them, etc., all the details about the home and the home life. And if that information is not provided, then the parent can be fined. And if they still don't provide that information, or the local authority is not satisfied that the parents are providing, you know, a so-called suitable education, then they will be issued with a school attendance notice. So the local authority will state a sort of first choice school and several other schools that will have places that the parents should send their school to. They then have something like 14 days to find an alternative school if they can, if those are not to their liking, and if they're accepted there and the local authority thinks that's okay, then they can send their children to that school. But otherwise, the school attendance order will then be issued, where the local authority will say, well, you have to send your child now to this school that either you've said you're going to send your child to, or we say you're going to send your child to. And, you know, you have to comply. If not, there is a prison sentence. I think it's, is it 6 months? 6 months to 9 months. So
now, for now, it's 6 months.
6 months, yeah.
If you don't comply with the school attendance order, it could raise to a year less 1 day.
Yeah, so it's quite unprecedented powers, because local authorities have complete scope to decide what constitutes a suitable education, and whether or not they like what the parents are teaching, or you as parents are teaching your children.
Okay. Sorry.
I was going to come in on that as well very quickly.
Go.
Two things. If you look at the Human Rights Impact Assessment for the 2022 Schools Bill, I'm fairly sure it's in that document. The DSE are even more blunt than they are in this one. It's the one thing they haven't spelled out in the same way, because in that documentation, they actually said these proposals will enable young people to learn about gender and sexuality when otherwise they might be shielded from doing so. So in the DFE's mind, it's very clear. It's not the parents. The parents might be tested on whether they're teaching the right stuff, but the children, they want to force them to learn their values, not the values of the parents. Back on stage with Brock Chisholm, and that's it. And going back to local council powers, the real Weasley word in the bill and the other document is it will be up to the council to decide what is in the best interests of the child. That is a very vague phrase. Who says what is the best interest of a child? That is surely the responsibility of the parent. And yes, it is too much power to the local authority to make a value judgment about other people's children. And this is what, it's not factual, it is value judgment. And there was a report this week released. Did anybody else pick it up? It was about the damage, I think, being done through gender ideology being taught, and the recording of self-ID gender on medical stuff and things like that, rather than biological sex. And then we also had the report a couple of weeks ago about boys from the Centre for Social Justice. Headline from that: more teenage boys have a smartphone than they do a father at home. And that is because I remember it. People were being told back in the 70s, you children don't need fathers. Now we are reaping the folly of that through successive generations. I better shut up, John.
So the second part of that question was, would children be forced to attend compulsory RSHE classes? Well, theoretically, they would be, yes, if they were had a compulsory school attendance order, because they have mandatory RSHE. There's a qualified opt-out for the sex education components of it, but that's very limited these days.
And for now.
Okay. Look, the next question is just somebody wants to know who the author of an article was. So if our speakers don't know, we can throw it open to our participants.
The culprit is here.
No, I'm not the culprit. I do know who it was. But it was a team of people.
Well, can I just say it's called the Parents Pact, a civil covenant for educational liberty and responsibility, linked in an article that I think was in the Critic. So
yes, it was in the Critic. It was The State versus the Family, it was called, published on the 23rd of January by the son of Lord Hacking, who is in the Lords. and he wasn't part of the team, but he'd picked it up. It is something that was headed up by a very reformed young Christian father. If you read it, the theology in it comes over as reformed theology, but it's a very serious thing. I was encouraging him, I'll be honest, to make it readable to everybody. So you didn't have just to have Christian theology to take it seriously. It is a very worthwhile read, even if you struggle on some of the theology. I'll put the link into the chat in a minute when I'm not talking. What I will say is it raises a very serious point. If this bill goes through, and if we're just looking at parliamentary votes, it will go through basically as it is. There could be other things. If war broke out, if Putin landed a rocket in Poland or something, it might not go through. You might not think that's the best solution, but it's a possibility. The more it gets delayed, the more it's a possibility. If it does go through, parents are going to have to say, is this a just requirement the state is putting on me? And people will come to different answers on that, because this pact, the Parents' Pact, is encouraging people to think seriously about non-compliance. In the home education circles, I can tell you there's already a wide variety of parents reach that conclusion. This is right from totally secular parents to faith-based parents, Christians and others, who are saying we will not comply. I'm past that age like John, but they are saying it seriously. Others are saying, well, we will comply, but we'll do it mischievously. So much data, they can't handle it. Or, my tutor's called Mickey Mouse, or things like that. But there is a heart swell already amongst home educators for practical resistance. And it will be up to every family, every parent, to say which is going to be more damaging to my children, to comply with this or to stand up. And the best defense is for so many people to say we will not comply, to get them to realize they've gone too far. And it doesn't have to be 80 or 90%. It can be as little as 20 or 30% of people. So this is a real area where serious thought is. I'd like to see this bill stopped, but more than that, I would like to see parents stand up and reclaim their parenthood, because I believe over several decades it's been, the agency of parents has been siphoned off by the state. Things have been transferred to the state. And just one quick example of that, which may not strike you, John and me, I think we're old enough to remember that when we were at school, if my parents wanted to keep me off from school for a day, they would send a note in and say, Randall will not be in school on such a day. We are taking him somewhere. And the school didn't have a choice. And what it had to do was put in the register that that was an authorized absence because my parents had authorized it. Today, with school fines, an authorized absence is one authorized by the head teacher, not by the parent. And nobody shouted loud when their law was switched on that. And we've let it happen. We've been parents in previous generations have been asleep at the wheel. And now is the time for us all to wake up and reclaim our responsibilities, our agency as parents. And this looks to me like it could be a watershed moment.
Thank you very much indeed. Very important words there, I think, and they relate, I think, to our next question, implied question from one of our um, visitors this evening. As a group, we met with our MP and caused her to care about this bill and vote on the amendments. Well done, you. However, I despair at how Labour have overruled these amendments and wonder what on earth we can do next in the face of such opposition. You were already, in a way, dealing with that, Randall, but I don't know whether either of you have any further comment to make on that cry from the heart. Tom, you're on mute.
It's got to go through all the stages of the Lords, who aren't going to overturn the bill, but there is a possible chance of mitigating some of the worst excesses of it. So, we can certainly be lobbying select members of the House of Lords and encouraging them to speak out and vote accordingly on the bill. I guess we have certain lists of Lords who might be more inclined than others to support us on that, so it's very important that we get them to speak in debates and try to get on the relevant scrutiny committees and vote our way. And I would say beyond that, when the bill does go through, seeing as though so much power is now being given to local authorities, that it's very important that we try and people with our point of view try to get representation at local government level. I was very gratified to receive a text earlier because one of our parent power team actually won a seat on Norfolk County Council in a by-election that took place yesterday. And that's quite significant because he came to us at Parent Power because he was challenging a sex education program that was being imposed on his school by Norfolk County Council. So now he's actually in local government. And I know it's just, that's just one councillor out of probably, 40 or 50, but it's a start. And he won with 56% of the vote on a 20-odd% vote share. So I think that points to a very, very positive way forwards that I think we need to go.
That's fantastic information there from you, Tom. Thank you. Next question. The US has an organization called Homeschool Legal Defense Association, which takes the battle on behalf of families when needed. As the bill will likely keep progressing, many families, especially minorities, will probably begin to be targeted and might be in need of some support, legal, financial, and material. Is there anything similar in the UK? Should something be put together?
I'll come in first on that one, John. I know HSLDA very well. I'm in touch with their international director. There are big differences between the States and here. There's a much bigger community. He doesn't like me calling it, but it's almost an insurance scheme. You pay your membership and then they look after you. It works that way. There are two problems in this country. The home educating community has never been big enough to sustain an organization funded like that. And secondly, it is much more diverse. In the early days in the States, it was well known that it was the evangelicals who were driving the home education, or as they call it, homeschooling movement. By the way, folks, we don't use homeschooling here. We use home education. They were driving the homeschooling movement in the States, and it became labeled as a very right-wing organization thing. That is no longer the case. It's much more diverse in the States today, and it's also one of the biggest drivers of it, I've been told, is gun crime in schools. Like here, it's the failures of schools that's driving people into home education. I don't think the community here is either big enough or of one grouping enough to sustain something like that. There is a small group of people who for 2 or 3 years now have been trying to get not the HSLDA model off the ground, but something that would provide legal support. My own feeling is where everything else has got to, if that would have been done 10, 15 years ago, it might have had a big enough base by now to help. I don't think they've been trying it for 3 or 4 years. They've not got it off the ground. It's a name, it's registered, but they've not got it off the ground. And I'm not convinced they will. But the problem is when we go for groups like this, we're shifting our responsibility as parents onto somebody else. And I think the real challenge of what's happening here and in other countries, remember, it's about 3 years ago when President Macron stood up in France and said, these Islamic extremists are using home education. We better ban it. And within 9 months, the whole situation in France had changed. And they are fighting it, but it has changed. And basically here, I think this is a matter for parents to regain their agency, not to buy agency in from another group. So that's my own personal convictions.
Thank you very much indeed for that. Someone's just written in to say, could you tell me the name of the guy you just mentioned in Norfolk? We're in Norfolk. Would be good to try to support him. Homeschool group here. Tom, you're on mute.
I've just seen that. I will respond to it privately just because his association with Parent Power is confidential. So, but I will respond privately to that one.
Okay.
Jenny.
Thank you. Here's a question. We're going to have to be very brief now because we're coming up to the end of this.
Just very briefly, the MP for North Norfolk, Steph Adelaide or something, was home educated in his younger school days and has written to one constituents very supportive of home education. So if it's North Norfolk, the MP there's good. Sorry, John.
No, not at all. On the subject, this is another one of our questions. On the subject of attempting to discuss with those who wouldn't initially see themselves as being impacted by the bill, how do you deal with apathy, particularly with fellow believers who dismiss any concerns with the, well, it's not a salvation issue type rhetoric? Those church neighbours who send their children to school and might be quite anti-home ed. How do you deal with that?
I'll let Randall answer that one, I think.
Yeah. I don't know. Wonderful. I'll tell you what I've done in the past, right? When we first began home education, Christians can get very defensive, right? You do something different, and they then begin to say, well, look, I don't have to do what you're doing. And yeah, that's true. All right. But it was a friend of mine who on another subject told me that by not doing what they did, I was condemning them. And it really gave me a clue what's happening going on when people come to you and say, well, you don't expect me to do that. So with Christians, I say very carefully now, I used to say, you should only home educate your children if God convicts you that's what he wants you to do. About 15, 20 years ago, with what was happening in schools, I changed my advice. My advice now, if somebody says to me, do I have to home educate my children? I say, no, you have to say to God, do you want me to send them to school? And if he doesn't tell you to send them to school, home educate them. Because the situation in schools is now so bad, it is offering your children to a foreign deity in that sense, if you're a Christian. So that's where I come from, that the situation in schools has now changed.
Well, listen, I want to thank you again, Mr. Hardy, Dr. Rogers. I'll finish on a formal note, although I've called you by your Christian names half the time. We're coming up for 9 o'clock. I imagine it's bedtime in many homes around the country. I just really want to say three things which I have taken from this, I think, fascinating presentation and wonderful answers from our speakers, wonderful questions from the people who've joined us. Thank you so much. And that is something that you said, Randall. These are not just home educating issues. Now, that to me is a kind of light bulb moment and something which I think is very important in our dialogue with the people who are, not convinced, who are apathetic. So I think that's a very important point. I have to say that an extract from the book of Genesis came into my head. After Pharaoh ordered the killing of all newborn males, the Hebrew midwives refused. That took some courage, didn't it? They did not do as the king of Egypt commanded them, but let the male children live. So, I mean, we are talking about perhaps going into this kind of resistance. And the third thing I've taken away from this is that we must do it again, because it's been a very lively question and answer session. Virtually everybody who came at the beginning of this webinar have stayed to the very end. I'm sure everyone is very busy. So thank you very much indeed for joining us. Thank you, Randall Hardy. Thank you, Tom Rogers. And please God, we'll keep in touch. We'll keep the momentum going somehow or other. And we will make sure that we seek to have the courage that those Hebrew midwives showed. Thank you for joining us.